Hi, enjoy listening. Eric Miller grew up in a place most people tried to leave. A quiet, weather-beaten town in western Pennsylvania, where the factories had long shut down and the promise of opportunity rusted like the steel on the old train tracks. His childhood home, a sagging two-bedroom ranch with peeling paint and a crooked mailbox, stood on the edge of a forgotten street. But to him, it was everything, because it held the only person who had ever truly loved him, his grandmother, Margaret. Margaret Miller wasn't the kind of woman who raised her voice. She was gentle, with creases around her eyes that came from kindness more than age, and a voice like warm tea on a cold morning. When Eric's mother died suddenly from a brain aneurysm before he was 3, it was Margaret who stepped in. She never spoke of Eric's father, because she never knew who he was. Her daughter had kept that secret with her into the grave. So, Margaret became mother, father, teacher, nurse, and friend. She raised Eric on oatmeal, stories from old books, and a kind of quiet dignity that you don't see much anymore. The two of them lived modestly on her social security, and whatever part-time work she could still manage at the local library. But no matter how little they had, Margaret never turned away a neighbour in need. She made soup for the sick and left fresh-baked bread on the porches of lonely old men with nothing in their fridge. Eric adored her, but that didn't mean he made things easy. As a boy, he was a whirlwind of scraped knees and broken curfews. The kind of kid who climbed roofs just to see the sunset, who punched first if someone looked at him sideways, who thought school was just a place where adults tried to trap your soul. His grades were abysmal. His teachers gave up. His name was often called over the loudspeaker, followed by, "Please report to the office." And when Margaret would arrive, usually wearing her knit shawl and a patient smile, she'd listen quietly as the principal recounted Eric's latest offence. Then she'd look at her grandson with soft, disappointed eyes and say just one thing. "You're better than this, Eric." That was the thing. She never hit him, never yelled. She didn't need to. The weight of her quiet hope was punishment enough. "You should whoop me," he'd mutter on the walk home, dragging his feet beside her. "That's what normal people do." Margaret would glance at him and shake her head. "I don't raise you to be afraid of me. I raise you to become the kind of man I'd be proud to know." It stuck. Not right away, but it stuck. By the time Eric turned 18, Margaret's health had begun to fade. Her hands shook more. She moved slowly. She never complained, but he could see the pain in her posture. That was the year he graduated high school. Barely. College wasn't on the table. They didn't have the money, and frankly, Eric didn't have the grades. "I'll figure something out," he told her, the day after graduation. "I'll work. I'll take care of you." "You already do," she said softly. brushing his messy hair back with one of her trembling hands. "But Eric, you need to think about your future too." "I am," he said, jaw set. "Just not the way people expect me to. I'll make a life. Might be slow, might be small, but it'll be mine." Margaret gave him a tired smile. "You've got a good heart. You'll go farther than you think." Eric got work wherever he could, loading trucks at the warehouse at dawn, running deliveries for the pharmacy in the afternoons, cleaning up construction sites on the weekends. He never complained. Every dollar he made went into the same envelope. Bills, groceries, a little extra to fix the leaking roof, and maybe, someday, a decent used car. He didn't go out. He didn't drink. He didn't date. Not because he didn't want to, but because he felt like there wasn't time. Margaret was getting older, and he wanted her last years to be full of comfort and peace. She deserved that, at the very least. "You need a girlfriend," she teased one night as he came home sweaty from the warehouse. "You need a new roof more than I need a girlfriend," he replied, kicking off his work boots. She chuckled. "You're 21, not 70. A woman could help you, make you laugh, lighten the load." Eric sighed. "Maybe one day, when I can give her something real." Margaret didn't press, but something shifted in her eyes, like she was watching time slip through her fingers. She passed away one warm morning in late September. Eric found her still in her bed, sunlight on her face, like she had drifted off in the middle of a dream. It didn't feel real, not at first. He called the ambulance. He called the neighbours. He sat at the edge of the bed, numb, his fists clenched and eyes dry. He didn't cry until the funeral. He cried like a boy. Like the boy he used to be, before the world told him to be strong. The neighbours were kind. They brought casseroles. They handled the paperwork. But after a week, they returned to their lives. And Eric was alone. For the first time in his life, truly alone. No parents, no siblings, no one. He stood in the silence of the house, Margaret's teacups still on the shelf, her sweater still on the back of the chair, and felt something hollow spread in his chest. The world hadn't stopped turning, but his had. After Margaret's funeral, Eric moved through the days like a machine. Eat, work, sleep, repeat. Grief didn't come like waves for him. It sat in his chest like cement, cold and unmoving. The house felt too quiet now. Every creaking floorboard, every ticking clock reminded him that the voice that once filled this space was gone. The smell of lavender soap still clung to the bathroom. Her slippers were still by the bed. He couldn't bring himself to move them, but bills didn't wait for sorrow. And Margaret had always taught him that you face what comes, even when it hurts. So Eric kept working. He took double shifts, odd jobs, whatever came his way. For a while, he worked as a stock boy at a grocery store by day, and cleaned offices by night. He scrimped, saved, and every time he passed the little used car lot on the edge of town, he slowed down. Then one late November evening, with a thick wad of carefully folded bills in his pocket, he bought it. A beat-up old Ford Escort with faded red paint and a dent in the passenger door. It wasn't much, but it was his. He washed it every weekend, buffed the dash, and even added seat covers to make it feel fresh. He named it Ruby, though he never told anyone that. Owning a car changed things. He signed up with a ride-hailing app and started driving people around town and to the next city over. It paid better than anything else he'd done. Sometimes he was behind the wheel 15 hours straight, coffee in one hand, the steering wheel in the other, back aching by midnight. But he didn't care. The money was good, and he had a goal now. Fix up Margaret's house and make it livable again. Safe, warm, solid. The kind of place she'd be proud of. He worked himself to the bone. But it didn't bother him. Hard work never scared Eric. What scared him was standing still. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. Rain had been falling since morning, soft but steady, slicking the asphalt like ice. Eric was rushing to pick up a fare on the edge of town. A woman late for a flight, or maybe just impatient with life. He checked the GPS, blinked tired eyes, turned a corner too fast. The tires skidded. He yanked the wheel. Too late. The car spun out with a sickening screech and slammed into the roadside ditch. Airbags didn't deploy. The front end crumpled like paper. Eric's head hit the steering wheel hard enough to make stars explode in his vision. Dazed, he blinked, tried the door, stuck. Smoke filled the cabin, a hissing sound somewhere in the back. Something was leaking. Gas. Then flames. They licked at the engine first, then curled under the dashboard like fingers. Panic surged. Eric kicked at the door, pounded the window. Nothing. "Help me!" his mind screamed. "Somebody, please!" Cars slowed as they passed. People stared. Some even rolled down their windows to film. But no one stopped. No one came. Until she did. A blur in the rain. Thin arms, torn hoodie, no umbrella. Just a wild look in her eyes and a rock in her hand. She smashed the driver's side window with one swing. "Come on!" she shouted over the wind. Eric grabbed her hand and clawed his way out just as the flames roared higher. They stumbled into the wet grass together, coughing, breathless, soaked to the skin. The car, Ruby, was gone in minutes. A burning shell. Eric sat there, shivering, watching the fire light up the grey afternoon, and felt something break open inside him. "She saved me," he thought. "That girl just saved my life. You okay?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He looked at her for the first time. Really looked. She couldn't have been older than him. Maybe 23. She had dirt on her face, stringy hair matted from rain, and eyes too sharp for someone so young. Eyes that had seen too much. I think so, he stammered, still stunned. Good, she muttered, standing up and wiping her hands on her jeans. Then quit looking like you lost everything. Eric laughed, choked on it, then coughed until he could breathe again. Thank you, he said, voice cracking. She shrugged. Don't mention it. What's your name? The girl hesitated. Then quietly, Grace. Of course it is, he thought. And that was the beginning of everything. The fire truck arrived too late. By the time the flames were doused and the smouldering remains of Ruby were reduced to twisted metal and blackened rubber, Eric was sitting on the back bumper of the fire truck, a scratch on his forehead and a heavy blanket over his shoulders. Grace stood nearby, arms crossed tightly, refusing the blanket the paramedic offered her. She looked uncomfortable in the presence of authority. Her eyes kept scanning the faces, vehicles, the uniforms. Eric noticed. Do you want to ride in the ambulance? A young EMT asked gently. No, Eric said quickly. I'm okay. He wasn't. His head ached. His muscles were stiff. His nerves were shot. But he was alive. And that meant everything. He caught Grace watching him. She wasn't concerned. Not exactly. She looked like someone who expected the worst and was just waiting for it to show up. When the crowd began to thin and the flashing lights dimmed behind rain, Eric walked over to her. You saved my life, he said again. You said that already. Well, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I meant it. She looked down at her shoes, worn canvas sneakers, one with a hole near the toe. I didn't think anyone would stop, she said. They never do. That stung more than it should have. Eric looked at her carefully. Rain dripped from the ends of her hair. Her hands were chapped, her jeans soaked. He could tell she hadn't had a hot meal or a shower in a long time. Where are you staying? He asked. Grace gave a half smile. That's a complicated question. Eric hesitated. Everything in his body told him to help her, but he knew how it would look. A single guy inviting a homeless girl to stay in his house. He didn't want to insult her, and he didn't want to scare her off. So he chose his words carefully. Look, I live nearby. My grandmother's house. She passed not long ago, so it's just me now. There's an extra room, a real bed, a roof. You can stay there if you want. No rent, no weird expectations. I owe you more than I can repay. She studied him for a long time, and he let her. You're not afraid of me, she asked finally. You don't think I'll rob you in your sleep? Eric shook his head. No, I don't. Grace blinked. Something like disbelief passed through her face. I've got a record, she said. Petty vandalism. I broke a store window once after they stiffed me on a paycheck. That sounds like they had it coming. Her lips twitched. Almost a smile. You really serious about this? She asked, folding her arms tight. I am, he said simply. No pressure, but the offer stands. She was quiet for a moment, then exhaled. Fine. Just for a couple nights. Until I figure things out. That's all I'm offering. Eric replied. A little shelter and some decency. As they walked side by side through the soft drizzle toward the edge of town, Eric felt something shift inside him. Not pity, not charity, just gratitude. She had dragged him from the edge. Now maybe he could do the same for her. Grace stood in the hallway of Margaret Miller's house, like someone expecting to be thrown out at any second. The place was modest. A faded floral couch, scuffed hardwood floors, a kitchen that smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood polish. But it was clean and warm. A framed embroidery above the door read, "Kindness is never wasted." It looked handmade. Eric tossed his keys on a small entryway table and turned to her. "You can take the guest room. Second door on the left. Bathrooms across from it. Water heater's a little moody, but it works." Grace nodded silently, clutching her backpack like it might vanish if she let go. He gestured toward the kitchen. "There's food in the fridge. You're welcome to anything. Seriously." She didn't move. Eric sighed and leaned against the doorframe. "Look, if you're thinking this is some kind of trap, it's not. I'm not trying to save you. I've been alone too. And I know what it's like when no one gives a damn." Still nothing. "You hungry?" That broke through. Grace hesitated, then gave a reluctant shrug. A little. Eric smiled faintly. "I make a mean grilled cheese." 15 minutes later, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table. She ate cautiously at first, then ravenously, like she hadn't had real food in days. He didn't comment. When she finally leaned back, full and quiet, he asked softly, "How long have you been on the streets?" Grace glanced toward the window, rain still streaking the glass. "Since I was 19. He blinked. "You're 23 now." She nodded. "Parents?" She flinched slightly, then shook her head. "My mum passed. My stepdad kicked me out after the funeral. Said I was a burden." Eric's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry." "She was a good mum," Grace said, her voice softer now. "She did her best. Never talked about my real dad. I think he left before I was born. But she always made me feel like I didn't need him." Eric nodded slowly. "Sounds like my grandmother." For the first time, Grace looked him in the eye. "She raised you?" "Yeah. My mum died when I was a toddler. Never knew my dad. So it was just me and Grandma Margaret." "You were lucky." He gave a sad smile. "I know." A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just full. Full of things neither had words for yet. Later that night, Grace wandered the house while Eric was in the shower. She found photos on the mantel. Margaret holding a toddler in a backyard kiddie pool. Teenage Eric in a graduation cap. The two of them sitting on a porch swing with matching ice cream cones. There was warmth in this house. History. Someone had loved here. She ran a hand along the back of the couch, tracing the threadbare fabric. When Eric came out, towel around his neck, she was standing in front of the only closed door at the end of the hall. "That was her room?" she asked. He nodded. "I haven't touched it." Grace nodded once, as if that told her everything she needed to know. "I can help fix this place up," she offered suddenly. "I'm not just looking for a handout." Eric smiled. "I believe you." That night, Grace slept with the door unlocked for the first time in years. The days that followed settled into a rhythm neither of them had expected. Grace cooked breakfast more often than not, oatmeal or scrambled eggs, sometimes just toast and coffee. Eric spent his mornings patching up odd jobs around the house, applying to new gigs now that the car and his driving job were gone. In the afternoons, they painted, fixed leaks, or rearranged the old furniture that still smelled faintly of Margaret's lavender sachets. Grace never took more than she needed. She made her bed every morning, folded her laundry with military precision, and never let herself sleep past 7 a.m. She kept saying it's just temporary. But she'd started humming when she cleaned, and Eric noticed. One rainy afternoon, while clearing out an old hall closet, they came across a dusty cardboard box marked "Photos, Family." Eric sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, flipping through faded Polaroids of birthdays, snowy Christmas mornings, and 4th of July barbecues with sparklers and big plastic lawn chairs. Grace crouched beside him, careful not to step on any of the delicate corners. "Is that your mum?" she asked, pointing to a smiling woman with curly brown hair holding a baby. "Yeah," Eric said, eyes lingering. "She died young. Aneurysm. I don't remember her." Grace reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a crumpled, worn wallet. From inside it, she slid out a miniature photograph, about 2 inches wide. It was a portrait of a woman with soft hazel eyes and long, wavy blonde hair. She was laughing, frozen in a moment that looked like sunlight. "This is the only photo I have of my mum," Grace said. "It was tucked in the hem of her old purse. I found it when I was sleeping in an abandoned bus station after she died." Eric took the photo gently. His breath caught. "I've seen her before," he said. Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" He reached over and picked up one of the photos from the Miller family box. "No, not in here. I mean, recently, at a house I worked in. Some rich guy on the other side of town. I was part of a crew doing interior repairs, ceiling work, touch-up painting, minor drywall patches. Big place. Probably worth a few million." "Are you sure?" she asked. Eric nodded slowly. "I saw a photo just like this in his entryway. Big one, framed in gold, over the staircase." Grace stared at him. "Are you saying she might have known him?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But the resemblance was crazy. It caught my eye. I even stopped to look at it." Something shifted behind Grace's eyes. Fear? Hope? Maybe both. "I always wondered who my dad was," she whispered. "But Mum never told me. Said it didn't matter. Said he wasn't the kind of man who would stick around." Eric was quiet for a long time. Then he looked her dead in the eye. What if she was wrong? That night, Grace couldn't sleep. The sound of rain tapping the roof should have been calming. It usually was. But now it felt like a clock ticking too loud in an empty room. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, her mother's picture tucked under her pillow like a relic. Her thoughts raced in circles. Could it really be him? Could the man in that mansion be my father? The idea felt too big, too dangerous. And yet she couldn't stop herself from wondering. Just after 6 a.m., Grace found Eric in the kitchen, nursing a mug of coffee. "Can we go?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. "Go where?" "To the house, the one you were talking about, where you saw the photo." Eric hesitated, rubbing a hand over his face. "It's been months. I don't even know if he still lives there." Grace's eyes didn't waver. "But you remember the address?" He sighed. "Yeah, I do." They didn't speak much on the drive. Eric borrowed a neighbour's truck, one he'd helped repair last winter, in exchange for occasional use. The rain had passed, and now clouds hung low over the sleepy edges of town. Like a curtain waiting to rise, the house came into view just after 9. It sat behind tall black iron gates and a circular driveway paved with brick. The lawn was immaculate, the hedges trimmed into perfect geometric shapes. Even the mailbox looked expensive. Eric parked across the street. "That's it," he said. "Third window up there? That was the office where I saw the photo." Grace stared through the windshield. "What's his name?" "Carl Whitmore," Eric replied. "Widowed, no kids. Or at least that's what people say." She felt her stomach twist. What if this is a mistake? What if I knock and he laughs? What if he slams the door in my face? Eric must have seen the fear in her eyes. "You don't have to do this today," he said gently. "I know," Grace said, "but I'm tired of not knowing. All my life I've walked around like I'm half a person. If there's a chance, just a chance, that this man has answers, I need to try." She opened the truck door and stepped out. Her legs felt like they were made of glass. Eric stayed behind, giving her space. Grace walked slowly up the long driveway. She didn't feel ready, but she was doing it anyway. That had to count for something. The brass door knocker felt cool in her hand. She took a breath and lifted it. Knock, knock, knock. A long pause. Then the door opened. A man stood there, tall, well-dressed, late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and clear blue eyes. He looked down at her with polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" Grace's voice wavered, but didn't break. "I think you might have known my mother." He tilted his head. "And who was your mother?" She reached into her pocket and held out the photograph. Her fingers shook. The man stared at it. For a moment, his expression didn't change. Then it did. The colour drained from his face. His voice came out hoarse. Her name was Danielle, he said quietly. Danielle Owens. Grace nodded. She was my mum. His eyes locked on hers. And your name? Grace, she said. Grace Owens. Carl Whitmore took a step back, as if the past had just walked through his front door and shattered everything he thought was true. Carl Whitmore didn't speak for a long moment. Grace stood on the threshold, hands clenched, trying not to shake. Finally, he stepped aside. Come in. The house was everything she expected. Silent, pristine, full of glass and light, and yet somehow cold. A grand staircase curled up toward the second floor, like a ribbon of polished oak. The walls were lined with oil paintings and black and white portraits of people who looked like they had never struggled a day in their lives. He led her into a study with floor-to-ceiling windows and tall bookcases. The smell of old paper and furniture polish filled the air. Carl sat behind a walnut desk, fingers steepled beneath his chin. I haven't seen that photograph in over 20 years, he said quietly. I took it myself. Grace sat opposite him, unsure whether to cry or run. Why did she never tell me? She whispered. About you? Carl let out a slow breath. Because I asked her not to. Grace's heart dropped. What? I was young, selfish, and scared. I met Danielle during a political fundraiser. She was working the event, catering. We spent one night together. One. He looked pained. She told me she was pregnant a month later. I didn't believe her. I thought she just wanted money. I told her to leave me alone. Grace's throat tightened. So you just forgot about her? No, Carl said. I tried, but I couldn't. A year later, I looked her up, but she was gone. Moved, changed numbers. No trace. Grace swallowed the lump in her throat. She never talked about you. Just said my dad wasn't someone worth remembering. Carl nodded. I earned that. A pause settled between them like dust in a long-abandoned room. I live on the streets, Grace said suddenly, her voice breaking. I've been homeless since I was 19. You have all this, she gestured to the marble fireplace, the antique books, the tailored suit he wore. And I've been sleeping under overpasses and behind dumpsters. And you're telling me my father lived 20 miles away this whole time? He flinched. I didn't know you existed. Not for sure. But you suspected? Yes. Grace rose from the chair, breath catching. So what now? You write a check? Apologize and send me on my way? No, Carl said, standing. I don't want to fix this with money. I want to know you, if you'll let me. She stared at him. Why now? He hesitated, then opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. Danielle sent me a letter once. I found it after my wife died. It was buried in a box of old papers. Things I told myself didn't matter anymore. He handed it to her. The envelope was yellowed, the ink faded. Inside, in her mother's handwriting, were just a few lines. I forgive you. I won't keep begging, but I want you to know your daughter has your eyes. Grace blinked rapidly, tears stinging. Carl's voice softened. I didn't earn this second chance, Grace. But if there's even a sliver of hope that I can make something right, I'd like to try. She stared at the letter. She thought of all the nights she curled into herself for warmth, the times she ate from trash bins, the birthdays spent alone. And now here stood a man with her eyes, her blood, and a past full of absence. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. The ride back to Eric's place was quiet. Grace sat with the letter in her lap, staring at it as if it might suddenly change, rewrite itself, say something different. Outside the truck window, the town rolled by. Quiet houses, familiar alleys, people going about lives that had always felt so distant from her own. Eric glanced at her. You okay? Grace didn't answer right away. Then, I don't know. He nodded. Makes sense. Back at the house, she went straight to her room and lay down without saying much. Eric didn't press. He just made her a sandwich and left it by the door. For 2 days, she barely came out. On the third morning, there was a knock. Not at her bedroom door, but the front one. Eric opened it to find Carl Whitmore on the porch, holding a paper bag and looking almost nervous. Can I come in? He asked. Eric stepped aside without a word. Grace was in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing one of Margaret's old cardigans over her t-shirt. Her hair was pulled back messily, and she looked like she hadn't slept much. Carl offered a faint smile. I brought breakfast, bagels, and some books. Thought maybe you'd like to read something. She eyed the bag. You came all the way out here to bring me bagels? Carl cleared his throat. No. I came because I didn't want to let too much time go by. I don't want you to think I disappeared again. Grace folded her arms. I'm still trying to figure out what you want from me. I want to know you, he said plainly. Not because I feel guilty, though I do, but because you're my daughter, and I missed everything. She stared at him. I'm not the kind of daughter you imagined, I bet. Carl's expression didn't flinch. You're exactly the kind I imagined. Strong, sharp, brave, she scoffed. I'm a runaway, a nobody. No, he said firmly. You're somebody who survived. They stood there in the silence, the truth between them like a frayed rope, trying to hold weight it was never built to carry. I want to offer you something, Carl said slowly. A place to stay. It's not a condition. You don't have to call me Dad. You don't even have to forgive me. But you don't belong on the street. Not anymore. Not ever again. Eric looked up from where he was quietly fixing a leak beneath the sink. She belongs where she chooses to be. Carl nodded respectfully. Of course. Grace's chest tightened. She looked from Carl to Eric. the man who shared her blood, and the one who'd opened his door when she had nothing. "I'm not ready," she said finally. Carl's shoulders dropped slightly. "That's okay. I'll wait." He left the bagels and walked out without another word. Grace stood there for a long time before finally sitting down at the table. Eric handed her a butter knife. "Cinnamon raisin or sesame?" She blinked. "What?" "Bagels," he said, grinning. "You should eat before you pass out from emotional intensity." A reluctant smile tugged at her mouth. She took the cinnamon raisin one, and for the first time in years, breakfast tasted like a beginning. Autumn arrived early that year. Leaves curled and dropped from the trees like quiet confessions. The wind smelled of earth and memory, and Grace found herself walking more, thinking more, pulling her mother's letter from her coat pocket like a talisman she didn't know how to read. Every few days, Carl would check in, never pushing, a short call, a simple text. Once, he left a hardcover copy of Jane Eyre in a brown bag on the porch with a note. "You said you liked stories about strong girls." She hadn't said that, but maybe he'd figured it out anyway. Eric gave her space. He didn't try to guide or fix her. He just stayed steady, like a dock, as she drifted toward her next shore. Then one Friday morning, Margaret knocked gently on her bedroom door. "There's something you should see, honey." Grace followed her to the living room where the morning news was playing. Carl Whitmore's face appeared on the screen, clean-cut, calm, standing at a podium during a charity gala. The caption beneath read, "Local real estate developer launches new shelter initiative for at-risk women." A reporter asked him, "What inspired you to start this?" Carl looked into the camera. "My daughter." The words hung in the air. Grace stared at the screen, her breath caught in her throat. "I didn't know she existed until recently," Carl continued. "But she changed everything. Her strength, her resilience, made me realize how easy it is to look away from people who need us most. So I'm not looking away anymore." The feed cut to a shot of the shelter, a half-renovated building covered in scaffolding, with volunteers hammering and painting. Grace sank onto the couch. Margaret rested a warm hand on her shoulder. "He's trying, sweetheart." Grace nodded. Later that afternoon, she walked the 7 blocks to the community centre, where Carl was rumoured to be helping with repairs. She stood across the street for a long time, watching him carry boards and talk with volunteers. He laughed at something, wiping sweat from his forehead, sleeves rolled up like an ordinary man. Not a millionaire, not a ghost from the past, just a person trying to rebuild something. Maybe for her, maybe for himself. She crossed the street. Carl saw her, froze, then slowly set down the board he was carrying. "You came," he said quietly. Grace's voice was steady. "This place, it's real." "As real as I can make it," he said. "It's yours, if you ever want to help. Design it, Paint. Pick the books for the reading room. It doesn't have to carry my name. Just yours. She looked around at the scaffolding, the raw wood, the blueprints taped to the wall inside. It wasn't perfect, not finished, but neither was she. I want to help, she said finally. Carl blinked hard, and a smile broke across his face. Not prideful or relieved, but simply human. Grace stepped inside the building, running her hand along a dusty window frame. This wasn't the end of her story, just the part where she started writing it herself. Winter was coming, sharp and sudden, like a final reminder of everything Grace had endured and everything she had gained. The shelter was almost complete now. Bright windows, freshly painted walls, shelves stocked with donated books and warm blankets. Volunteers bustled in and out, their laughter echoing through the halls like a new kind of music. Grace stood by the front door, watching as a group of young women arrived. Some tentative, others exhausted. She greeted them all with the soft confidence of someone who had been there before and found a way out. Carl was beside her, quiet but proud. His presence felt less like a looming shadow and more like steady ground. "Thank you," one of the women whispered, eyes glistening, "for this place, for believing in us." Grace smiled. "It's yours, all of ours." Later, Eric handed her a cup of coffee, his smile warm and easy. "You did it, Grace." She looked out the window at the snowflakes starting to fall, each one unique, fragile, but together forming a blanket of hope. "Not me," she said softly. "All of us, the ones who never gave up." Carl joined them, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm glad you came home," he said. Grace leaned into him, feeling the weight of years lift just a little. "Me too," she whispered. And for the first time in her life, Grace knew what it meant to truly belong. If you like the story, I would be very happy to have your support. Click the thumbs up. And to not miss new stories, subscribe and click on the bell. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and all the best.